Well, now they've actually made you into terrorists. I mean, so this has become a while.
It's gonna like be wobbling all over.
Drop the turnip truck. You can see it heading this way.
Yeah.
A lot of the
So be really careful of the. All right, guys, can you hear us? How's the sound? Checking the sound.
Are we on the verge?
You are. We're streaming now, so it's going.
So it might through there and around the same time.
This is a microphone.
because I know she was just for 12 years. Let's check it
I think that helped out. I think that actually
Hey everybody, we're gonna get started. Thank you so much for your patience. We had a little bit of a delay, a little miscommunication, but we're all here. I'm glad we're not being stereotypical New Yorkers and freaking out. So everything is okay. But my name is Frank. I'm a member of Deep Green Resistance New York, and we're happy to host Guy McPherson tonight in a discussion, an uplifting Friday night discussion on climate change, grief, and resistance. So I applaud you all for coming out on a Friday night in the end of February here. Apparently the end of Mercury in retrograde, which is the cause of any problem that can ever come up. We're going to have a discussion tonight, and some of the things that we had talked about, I've been to a few of these talks and just like climate change talks, and I'm assuming everyone here is somewhat up to date on the state of climate change and the state of our society. And what we were hoping tonight, just to put this in kind of perspective and something to prepare you for, is that this would not be such a passive discussion, that this would be a discussion. So in that light, I would appreciate if you could just, if you have not already, just introduce yourself to the person next to you really quickly.
I got nobody
All right. So that's really good. So one thing that we're also going to really push is that this be an active thought process. That we're going to talk about a lot of things, about many things that they do bring out a lot of grief. And I think there are a lot of people on the left in mainstream America who are overcome with grief of their day-to-day lives. And I actually think it was really poignant that the group before us was a youth group, mainly of color, here in an urban setting, when we talk about these things like climate change. And I think we talk about them in abstract concepts. And for me, especially, it's always important to remember who is going to be affected by these things. And it will be the youth that are affected. It will be especially the youth in the urban setting of color, of lower socioeconomic status, the indigenous, the people in Africa that will not have water. And so when we talk about these large concepts, it's important to remember that these are things that are happening and that will happen to real people. And that really helps me kind of process this information. And in that idea, we always try to start off any DGR talk with the idea that we as a culture are beneficiaries of genocide, and that this land, the land that we're on now, is stolen, and it's bloody, and we are complicit in the history of that. And I think it's important to remember that this is a Lenape land that was stolen, just as many other lands are stolen. And so the format of tonight, Guy will come up and I'll introduce Guy for a little bit. I'll talk a little bit about deep green resistance and what our thoughts are and what do we do with this information. Then we'll have a little bit of a discussion. And just, kind of think about it in an action-based discussion. What will you do tomorrow? What will you do on Monday? If this is the reality that you accept. And then there'll be the beginning part of a workshop that will continue on tomorrow morning about this idea of grief and how do you come out of that. And Guy will talk more about that afterwards. So I'll have a discussion, just a short little break to mingle, and then the workshop. Okay? And I just wanted to start off with this poem that has really influenced my thinking in the last couple of years. And it's called Angels and Ancestors, and it's written by a social justice poet, Drew Dellinger. So Angels and Ancestors, or Ancestors and Angels, I'm sorry. I write words to catch up to the ancestors. An angel told me the only way to walk through fire without getting burned is to become fire. Some days angels whisper in my ears as I walk down the street, and I fall in love with every person I meet. I think maybe this could be a bliss like when Dante met Beatrice. Other days, all I see is my collusion with illusion. Ghosts of projection masquerading as the radiant angel of love. I feel like the ancestors brought us together. I feel like the ancestors brought us here, and they expect great things. They expect us to say what we think and live how we feel and follow the hard paths that bring us near joy. They expect us to nurture all children. I write poems to welcome angels and conjure ancestors. I pray to the angels of politics and love. I pray for justice's sake, not to be relieved of my frustrations. At the same time, burning sage and asking ancestors for patience. I march with the people to the border between nations where everything stops except the greed of corporations. Thoughts like comets calculating the complexity of the complicity. There's so much noise in the oceans, the whales can't hear each other. We're making them crazy, driving dolphins insane. What kind of ancestors are we? Thoughts like comets leaving craters in the landscape of my consciousness. I pray to ancestors and angels, meet me in the garden. Meet me where spirit walks softly in the cool of the evening. Meet me in the garden under the wings of the bird of many colors. Meet me in the garden of your longing. Every breath is a pilgrimage. Every breath is a pilgrimage to you. I pray to be a conduit. An angel told me, the only way to walk through fire, become fire. And so I hope that can put up a context for what we hope to come out of tonight, and hope to build a community that will somehow answer the call to the reality that I think so many of us accept. So to talk about what that reality is, so I want to introduce Guy McPherson, who I've seen speak a couple times and how has really influenced my thinking as far as climate change. Many of you are familiar with him, conservation biologist. Has put out many, many publications, many books of which we'll have in the front, and has been kind of one of the preeminent thinkers in this idea of near-term extinction, that this idea of climate change is not some abstract idea, but that is something that is happening and will happen very soon because of some of the evidence that he'll show. So without further ado, I want to introduce Dr. Guy McPherson.
Thank you, Frank, and thanks to DGR. Thank you especially to all of you for coming. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change is one of the most conservative scientific bodies on the planet. In their fifth assessment, officially released last year but heavily leaked beginning in September of 2013, they concluded that global warming was irreversible in the absence of massive geoengineering. This is an amazing conclusion for a very conservative body. Truthout correctly titled this approach Fantasy Technology, and a half a dozen referee journal articles have come out since that September 2013 leak of the IPCC report, indicating that the geoengineering approaches will either not help or will make matters worse with respect to climate change. So calling this fantasy technology is about right. According to the NASA chief, a couple of days after the Truthout report, the chief of NASA concludes that our future depends on a mission to Mars because we're running out of habitat here. And he specifically identified 2030 as the year we have to get off this rock. Elon Musk of Tesla fame says that's not fast enough. We have to get out of here at least a half a dozen years before that. because we're running out of habitat sooner than that. We're in the midst of abrupt climate change. The whole story is really presented in 3 panels. Well, 4, because I couldn't stand the misogyny of the first panel, so I had to do the whole teacher thing and revise it a little bit. But this is where we are. This is what human beings do. That's right. The hell is happening? Oh, the end. That went quickly, didn't it? There's a little video on YouTube advertising Xbox, of all things, and it shows a baby shooting out a womb, and 45 seconds later, the baby has flown through the air and aged its entire life. It's really stunningly graphic and impressive. And then at the very end, the baby is, in 45 seconds, is about 85 years old. His teeth are all falling out, curls up, and boom, it hits the ground right on the top of it. That's the whole story. Life is short. So the tagline is life is short, play more. I think that's probably what the Dalai Lama would say. I would say live more. We have entered the era of irreversible climate change. According to a paper in Climatic Change published in November 2009, only collapse of industrial civilization prevents runaway climate change. And the paper was actually written in 2007. It was a tremendous political battle to get it published. And finally, Pauline Schneider, one of the more brave members of the academic community, agreed to have the paper published. He was the editor of the journal Climatic Change, and that was published shortly before he died. 2 subsequent papers by the author, Tim Garrett, further indicate that civilization is a heat engine, that any manner of maintaining civilization heats up the planet. So civilization itself is the heat engine, and this is the response of mainstream academic climate scientists. They're going to change the system from the inside. Well, the inside is the problem. The academic climate scientists who are claiming to change things from the inside by writing yet more referee journal literature indicating that civilization is a heat engine, that climate change is underway, they're the cockroaches in the belly of the chicken. They're already dead, they just don't know it yet. Civilization is a heat engine. As long as civilization is maintained, the heating will be maintained. And it doesn't really matter whether we use solar panels or wind turbines, which are derivatives of fossil fuels, not replacements for fossil fuels, or whether we use fossil fuels more directly. A brief overview of the period during which we could lose habitat for humans on the planet. So we haven't had humans on this planet at 3.3 C above baseline or higher at any point in the past. We were a shade over 3.22 during one period of human existence, 3.2 degrees over baseline. Baseline is the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, say 1750 or so. So we use that as the baseline. We're currently 0.85 degrees centigrade above baseline. It's about 1.5 degrees Fahrenheit. So imagine if you have a fever of 100 degrees. That's where Earth is at right now. Okay, so you'll survive. Right, you have a fever of 100, that's not that big a deal. Yeah, it slows you down in productivity, you're unable to think as well as you could before, you're dragging a little bit, but it's hardly lethal. We're headed for more than 3.5 C above baseline, which is quite a big deal. You know, more than 3.5 C above baseline. That's the equivalent of a body temperature for you of 105 degrees. And you're not going to survive that very long. And as a consequence, human extinction will result not because we're not incredibly clever. In fact, we are, right? We sort of misnamed ourselves. I think we shouldn't have called ourselves Homo sapiens. Sapiens. We doubled down on wisdom. Sapiens means wise, the wise ape. So we're Homo sapiens sapiens, the doubly wise ape. And I think a better name would have been Homo calidus, the clever ape. We are stunningly clever. But plants won't keep up, animals won't keep up, and we depend upon plants ultimately for our own survival. Already, general planetary warming is proceeding 10,000 times faster then plants can evolve through natural selection 10,000 times faster, and we've just been in this slow linear change so far. We have only recently entered the arena of abrupt climate change. And there's no way plants, much less animals that depend upon the plants, are going to be able to keep up with the rapid changes that are ahead. They can't keep up already with the slow changes that have occurred. So, what happens with the collapse of industrial civilization? The best case scenario from my perspective, the worst case scenario for humans on the planet. But the best case scenario for every other organism on the planet. With collapse of industrial civilization, that means we have a heating of 1.2 plus or minus 0.2 C, according to a paper by James Hansen and colleagues. 2 subsequent papers have demonstrated the conservative nature of this paper, indicating that 1.4 really is pretty conservative. That we can expect, in addition to the 0.85 degrees C, we're going to experience another 1.4 at least when civilization fails. Why? Because civilization puts reflective particles up into the atmosphere. They constantly fall out, but they're constantly added back in. And the most reliable source of those reflective particles is low-grade coal. So one of the more famous climate scientists in the world, Michael Mann, who works at Penn State University, in an interview with Tom Hartman a few months ago, indicated that we can't stop civilization. We can't stop burning coal because it's protecting us. When we stop burning coal, yes, this is one of the premier climate scientists in the world encouraging us to keep burning coal. And I wonder why we're fouled up. Because, as he points out, when we stop burning coal, those sulfates, especially associated with low-quality coal, which are higher in sulfur, therefore sulfates, those sulfates will all fall out of the atmosphere and they won't be added up, so we lose the reflective particles that allow for dimming of the planet. There's a BBC documentary on this from 2007. I think you can catch it online for free. So when we stop putting the sulfates up into the atmosphere, we warm very dramatically, very quickly. 9/11 demonstrated how quickly. There was 3 days later, on September 14th, 2001, there was a tremendous, easily measured change in the temperature signature at the global level because planes stopped flying in the United States. That's it. Coal-fired power plants kept going. Every other country still had planes flying except the United States, and yet there was a measurable increase in the temperature signature of the planet. So that's how rapidly things can occur. In addition, there's the nuclear power plants that will melt down catastrophically. It takes 10 to 60 years to decommission a nuclear power plant. The recent ex-head of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, about 2 years ago in New York City, in response to a question from a citizen journalist who's standing at the back of the room, said that it would take 60 or maybe 50 years, because he was backpedaling, to decommission Indian Point nuclear power plant. 60 or 50 years depends on how much money we have. Well, civilization isn't going to be around for another 60 or 50 years, and when it fails, we're going to have fires the likes of which this planet has never seen, because the spent fuel rods in the cooling towers will be exposed to the air and will explode. And there's more than 1,200 of those pools containing spent fuel rods. So when those go ballistic, we're going to see some interesting impacts from ionizing radiation scattered around the globe. So there's a couple of problems associated with the collapse of industrial civilization, even though it's the best case scenario for non-human organisms. Because currently civilization allows us and apparently requires us to drive to extinction 150 to 200 species every day. That's from a United Nations report in August 2010. It's undoubtedly conservative. So not only does civilization act as a heat engine, it also acts as an engine for omnicide. Now, according to Natalia Shkova, who has studied methane being released from the subsea floor of the Arctic Ocean for the last 8 years or so, she's an expert, and based on a paper she had published in summer of 2013, she concludes that a 50 gigaton burst of methane is highly possible at any time. That will account for a 1.3 degree C temperature rise. Now, we're headed for an Arctic that is ice-free. You see, 2012, we had the lowest ice extent ever in the Arctic. There's been some recovery since then, 2013 and 2014. But, as it turns out, it looked like last November that 2012 was, in fact, still the lowest year in terms of ice cover. And here was 2014. But, oh, sorry, here's 2014, way up here. And what you're seeing in the interim is, as of data from a week ago, we are at the lowest ice cover right now and headed for lower ice cover than we were even in 2012. So it could be that we'll see an ice-free Arctic this year. And I can't imagine that that 50 gigaton burst of methane would stay under the Arctic Sea if that happens. And in fact, should civilization collapse this year and we observe that 1.4 C temperature increase, I see no way for the Arctic ice to remain in September of this year. September is the timing for the annual low of ice cover in the Arctic, because that's the end of summer. So what does that mean? That means that we have 0.85 C plus the 1.4 C associated with collapse of civilization plus 1.3 C associated with a 50 gigaton burst of methane. That's the first burst. It won't be the last. There's a lot of methane under there. Way, way more than we've burned in fossil fuels so far. And so that will lead to conservatively to 3.55 C above baseline, about a third a degree higher than we have ever observed with humans on the planet. And more than 3/4 of that temperature rise comes within a span of about a year or so. So it's very, very abrupt change. Now, we don't know if this causes extinction. The problem with running this experiment is that there's no replication. We haven't gone extinct before. So we don't know if a third of a degree above the point at which we've ever had humans on the planet before is sufficient to drive us to extinction. I suspect that we'll lose habitat for all or most humans on the planet, but it's hard to say. So the shortest time frame in which we could experience human extinction or loss of habitat for humans because of the inability to grow food, because the plants can't keep up with the temperature change and the temperature fluctuations, that could be within about 18 months from now. Could be. I'm not saying that will happen. I'm suggesting that it could happen. And again, that's like a low-grade fever that is suddenly a 6.4. That's 105 degrees fever when we get up to 3.55 C. And the Earth doesn't last long in terms of supporting our species and hundreds of others, thousands of others, at that rapid rise to a high level of global average temperature. Sounded like the door closing. Probably just a metaphor. So, methane coming out of the Arctic Ocean has been pretty well studied at this point. The methane that could be released there was first described in referee journal literature nearly 6 years ago, and subsequently described in several other reliable sources. And so we know quite a bit about that single source or self-reinforcing feedback loop. This is a self-reinforcing feedback loop. It's the snake that eats its tail. It's a phenomenon that feeds upon itself, so it goes faster and faster, and the faster it goes, the further it moves along, the faster it's able to go. It's a snowball that's gaining speed and gaining mass as it moves down the hill. So that's one of several self-reinforcing feedback loops I'm going to mention. In fact, that one was described in 2009, and the next one in the referee journal literature was in 2011, and now we're up to 47 of them. So based on that one, we could lose habitat for humans within the next year and a half, or maybe it'll be a little longer than that. Paul Beckwith, who's a professor at the University of Ottawa and who studies this subject, predicted that we could have a 6C increase within a decade. That was October 2012, and then a couple of years later he says it's underway. It's been triggered. We could have a 5 to 6 degrees temperature increase, global average, within a decade or two, and he actually even pondered the idea of a 16C temperature rise within that same period. So these are big numbers, and they're consistent with what we know from the paleoecological record. 55 million years ago, there was an event that apparently resulted in a 5 sea temperature rise in 13 years, as reported in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences about 2 years ago. The paper has been questioned by a minor journal that just came out last month. We'll see how that turns out. But in any event, these kinds of events have happened in the past, and there have been relatively stable points in the past at 5 or 6 degrees centigrade above baseline, 12 degrees above baseline, and so on. So there's been a handful of relatively stable states in terms of global average temperature. And they've been relatively stable. They've typically taken longer to get there than what we're looking at now, but they haven't had 47 self-reinforcing feedback loops pushing them before. And yes, they have supported life, but it's difficult for me to imagine supporting human life at 4 degrees above baseline centigrade, much less 5 or 6, in a very rapid period of time. I used to be the only crazy person in the room. Actually, I might be the only crazy person in this room. I usually start out by insulting everybody, and I miss the opportunity until, 10 minutes in. But relatively recently, 14 men and 3 women have joined the near-term human extinction party in predicting that we don't have long on this planet. And most of these projections are a result of climate change. A few are because of the extinction crisis. The 6th great extinction is underway, and you can't drive 150 to 200 species to extinction every day and expect that at some point humans won't be involved. Right, already we have 5 million people every year dying of early deaths as a result of climate change. And we don't have the slightest idea how rapidly we're losing habitat because we're killing every other species on the planet. But surely the day comes when the pollinators and the decomposers that we depend upon for our very lives are not up to the task because we get rid of too many of them.
And it's chummy, people that are putting chumsy, what is it exactly that they say about the extinction?
Well, you can go to this essay, guymcpherson.com/climate-chaos, and that'll take you to each one of these people who predicts near-term human extinction. So in some cases, it's a few decades away. Sir Bob Gandalf says it's 2030. Paul Ehrlich says it's 99% chance by 2065, I believe it is. So it varies a little bit, but they're all making this prediction by the end of the century.
That's because human beings are, some say because human beings are not doing anything, don't they can stop it?
No, none of them say that there are things we can do. None of them are saying at this point that we can turn this around. These are people who have concluded that we are headed for near-term extinction and there's nothing we can do at this point. Okay, that it's irreversible. There's a lot of people, there have been people saying for decades that unless we turn the ship around, and the IPCC is one of those, right? So they've been saying since for 26 years that we got to reduce emissions. And they say it every time.
Yeah.
Every major assessment that comes out, they say, unless we reduce emissions, we're in real trouble. Well, guess what? They've been saying that for almost 30 years, and we're in real trouble. They're right.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, they're right. And so it's pretty evident that we have triggered the clathrate gun. The subsea clathrates or hydrates, methane from the Arctic Ocean has been triggered, as worried about by James Hansen in his book, Storms of My Grandchildren. Methane in the atmosphere has gone exponential, and we don't know any way to get rid of that. So short of a miracle, there's really nothing to be done. I'm not suggesting now, nor have I ever suggested, inaction as a response. Right? So I'm not proposing that we do Nero and play the fiddle while Rome burns. What I am suggesting is that this is no longer about us. And in fact, it probably was never about us. Right? There's a few other species on the planet too. And most people think that we're the one. We're the one, the apex of evolution. It's all about, so 4.6 billion years of planetary history. And it's all about us because we showed up a couple 100,000 years ago.
Yeah, but the dolphins.
Wait, that doesn't make sense.
The dolphins don't survive either, right?
Right. probably no large mammals will survive, but we don't know that, and I would suggest, paraphrasing Derek Jensen, that if we have salmon, and how could I not paraphrase Derek Jensen without mentioning salmon? If we have salmon a week from now and a year from now, we might have salmon for a long time, but if we don't have salmon a week from now, we don't have salmon a month from now, then we'll never have salmon again. Because extinction is forever. And forever is a long time, especially toward the end. So I would argue that the more seeds we keep, the more species we provide habitat for as long as we possibly can, the more rapid will be the recovery of a living planet. As Edward O. Wilson, the conservation biologist at Harvard points out, it only takes about 10 million years after a great extinction event for the planet to recover again, for it to be vibrant and thriving. Only 10 million years. That's not anywhere close to forever. You know, people talk about the long view. That's what I'm interested in, is the 10 million year view. What's going to be here long after we're going, because we were never guaranteed a spot at the table, much less forever, which is what we think. So, I've gone on too long already. I want to turn the mic over to Frank. Thank you all very much. All right.
So I don't normally do this, but I was hoping that we could, everyone could just close your eyes. And it dawned on me the other day that I've read a lot about climate change, and I've read a lot of stuff about Guy's stuff. And I'm a member of this group that is talking about resistance and climate change. And I was rereading some of the science. I was rereading one of the articles that Guy had written, and it dawned on me that I had not, I had intellectualized it. Have this for posterity. Near term. That I had, thank you. All right. That I had intellectualized a lot of the science, and I was reading it, and I was overcome with an overwhelming sense of grief. And so I was hoping that we could just take a minute to kind of really process what was just said. That this way of living and this way of thinking that we have is inconsequential in the grand scheme of geological history, and we are at a point in our civilization where our way of life is now killing the planet, killing ourselves, killing many people in the Middle East, many people in Africa, 200 species extinct a day. That's irreversible. So what we want to do now for the next, just a short period of time, because this is not the whole goal of what tonight will be, is to think about what to do with that information. So I just want to open this up for a discussion on what does the mainstream culture tell you that are some of the answers? Just real quick, boom, some answers here.
Change your light bulb.
Change light bulbs. All right, what else? Geoengineering.
Keep shopping.
Keep shop. Okay, yes. Recycling.
Have children.
Have children. What are some other ones?
Drive a Tesla.
Windmills. Tesla. The Tesla battery. I just read an article saying that was the savior for the climate.
Speak to God.
Okay. Yeah.
Lower emissions.
Lower emissions.
Public transportation.
Okay.
Nuclear energy.
GMOs, nuclear energy. Good. How about some other things, a lot of the, I think of the climate march that just happened in September. What were some of the asks that they had?
Green jobs.
Green jobs, what else?
Policy changes.
Renewable energy.
Policy. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so I think those are the,
Vegan diet.
what's that?
Vegan diet.
Yeah. Great, so I think we covered the three main, and I'm just going to kind of contextualize that. So usually the three main areas of change that the mainstream culture, okay, even the progressive left, teaches us. The first one are these individual choices, okay? So I heard light bulbs, Vegan diet is a really popular one now, that if everyone became vegan, we would change the world. And these are not that we shouldn't change light bulbs and that we shouldn't go vegan or that we should not go vegetarian or something. But these are the answers that are sent out. I heard some other ones: shop more, shop less,
Shop
recycle.
different.
What's that?
Shop different.
Shop different. Yeah. Okay. Good. Yeah. So what do we think about those lifestyle choices in light of what has just been talked about? That there is going to be a 50 gigaton burst of methane. Not like a hypothetical one, but one that is already happening. I mean, I've read this, I think a guy mentioned this in an article, that some of the scientists in the Antarctic say that the methane gas, it looks like seltzer water with all the gases coming out. So what do we think when we're told, or the culture tells us that lifestyle choices will somehow save us?
Irrelevant. We're pissing in the wind.
Polishing the brass on the Titanic.
That's a popular, I feel like, analogy. The Titanic.
We're farming in a windstorm.
Yeah.
There are three issues that weren't discussed, that have to be discussed if you're going to consider planning the power.
I'm just going to hold you, because we're going to finish this, and then we'll have time for like longer discussion points.
Okay.
So hold that thought. Okay, so just to summarize, I heard a lot of like, they're irrelevant, they're probably not going to be effective, all right? And this is kind of my thing with these lifestyle choices, is that it is the mainstream culture is telling us that these are the things that we should be doing. When I think we intuitively know that it is irrelevant whether or not I eat vegan or I have energy efficient light bulbs, that they are not going to answer a 50 gigaton burst of methane. Irrelevant. It's not that they're bad or good, they're just not going to be effective. Generic politician with death behind saying, well, I always win. So policy change, okay? Regulation, which is a really popular one. So decreasing emissions, carbon taxing, carbon schemes, green energy, green jobs are kind of another thing.
Public transportation.
Public transportation, and like I said, these are things that are good. You know, I think of like the Clean Water Act, the Clean Air Act, were probably the two most radical legislation pieces that we had. Okay, but we live in the U.S. I'm assuming almost all of us are U.S. citizens or U.S. born. How do we feel about regulation in light of the current politics? Do we feel that that is an efficient thing? What's that?
Ineffectual.
Ineffectual.
Not gonna happen.
Yeah.
Yes. Probably know the regulated, so captured by the people that regulate anyway.
It's all better.
Yeah, and I think, you know, looking at the fracking issue in New York with the ban in fracking that just happened, which I think is an amazing thing, right? I think that we should ban fracking, but that there are a lot of geopolitical things about the price of oil that are now saying that fracking was never actually going to be a real risk in New York anyway. And that this was like a tactic to, it was like a red herring, similar to what the Keystone XL is, that, you know, if you can focus all your energy on that, then you forget about the bomb trains that are coming down the Hudson River. And so it's just like the system. And I think one thing, the Halliburton loophole, which I'm assuming most people are familiar with, is what allows fracking to get through the Clean Water Act, which was put in by Dick Cheney under this kind of shock doctrine capitalism. And so you had the regulation, the Clean Water Act would restrict fracking. But because of the way our politics work, it's inefficient. And then the other idea of, you know, we have dioxin. Dioxin is the most toxic chemical ever known to man. It is produced, or to humans, I should say, it is produced whenever you burn plastic. And it is the most toxic carcinogen that we know of. It is present, they say, in almost every mother's breast milk. And so then it's this question of like regulation. How do you regulate the amount of dioxin that is healthy to give to the most vulnerable of our species? It's inconsequential. And I think the third one I think is most troubling to the left, specifically, is this idea of green energy and green jobs. Okay, and I'm not going to talk too much about it, but there's a lot of resources and things that we have in the back. This idea of like green utopia, I've heard Tesla, windmills, solar panels, you know, instead of a liquid natural gas processing plant out in the Rockaways, they want to put a windmill farm. And I think it's this, you know, maybe it's an American thing, I'm not entirely sure, but how do you get a 20-ton windmill out there without oil? You know, how do you, they call like rare earth minerals that are made out of solar, that make up photovoltaic cells, they're rare for a reason. And just similar to oil, the problem with oil is it just happens to be in the Middle East. And it just happens to be that there are a lot of brown people that live there who just happen to have to die. The same thing is happening with the rare earth minerals, where we go to China, we blow up the mountains, and it just so happens that there are a lot of Chinese people that live there. Africa, exactly, yeah. The conflict minerals there. So again, now we're starting to think of like, these are the three main things that are taught to us, that these are the ways that we can change society, change the world. But if the problem is the civilization, the problem is the engine that is continually burning, then what do we do about that? And so now that's what the mainstream culture teaches us. What are some other maybe leftist, more radical histories teach us are maybe more effective? Or what are some thoughts that we could do? This is a little bit harder. Starve, yeah, okay, yeah. Socialism is one answer that's put out, yeah. Be the change. Be the change, yeah. Well, that's kind of a lifestyle choice. Divestment. Kind of the star of the economy, yeah.
Shun consumerism, that's a big part of it.
Yeah, encourage second-hand markets. Yeah.
Stop globalization.
So stop globalization. No easy task.
Permaculture?
Permaculture, yeah.
Commit to stopping the wars.
Before Martin Luther King was assassinated, he wanted to shut down Washington, D.C. You know, bring a couple million people and just encamp at the wall.
Yeah, no, that's the largest concern.
Revolution, I like that. Well, here, this is a hard question, right? And there is no easy answer, otherwise we wouldn't be here. We would be doing whatever those answers are. Okay. And here, so this talk has been put on by Deep Green Resistance, and we have a strategy. It's not, I wouldn't call it an answer, because I don't think that there are answers to these problems. But our proposal is a way of thinking about the problem. Okay? And I've heard some of these, you know, this idea of like shutting down. Like, what does that look like? And I think most of the science, even the IPCC, the conservative body of scientists say, you have to shut down the emissions, which means that you would have to shut down 80% of the fossil fuels, which in a capitalist society is impossible. You can't. It has to grow. It's just the way the machine works. And so to stop that means you have to stop that machine.
Yeah.
And the basic goal of our strategy is called Decisive Ecological Warfare. And we're just going to summarize this, and there are things in the back. Decisive Ecological Warfare.
Yeah.
And there's more information in the back, and you can talk to any of us about it specifically. But the idea is it's a two-part goal, kind of the things that were brought up, this idea of stopping, so dismantling. That this culture, this civilization needs to stop. It needs to shut down. Because otherwise, we're going to continue killing all the humans, we're going to continue killing 200 species a day, to not speak of the non-human, non-animal species that are dying, okay, on a daily basis. That this way of living needs to stop.
Yeah, but what about the nuclear power plant?
This is a larger problem. Like I said, these are not answers.
Yeah.
Okay? But if we continue, it's inevitable what will happen. And then the second part of it is this building, which I also heard, permaculture, and this idea of rebuilding. Is that, you know, this is why we start off with this idea that we are on stolen land from people who did not kill the earth.
Yeah.
And it's not to proselytize or to shock, but that they had a different way of thinking, and that they were building, which is maybe what we need to learn from. And so we have two goals in what we call decisive ecological warfare. It's this idea of dismantling, stopping, at whatever it takes. And then this idea of rebuilding. And it's broken up into 5 different strategies. Okay, like I said, we'll just touch on it. One of the things that makes Deep Green Resistance much different, I would say, than other environmental groups is that we openly advocate for the use of underground sabotage. Because this is something that this culture, this civilization is inhumane, is unethical, and is killing the planet. And that it needs to be stopped. And if that means that laws need to be broken, then so be it. And what we propose as a group, And based on histories of other resistance movements, somebody brought up Martin Luther King, the civil rights movement, and some of the other resistance movements. I was talking to somebody the other day about the Zapatistas down in Mexico and the indigenous movements that are doing illegal activities.
Yeah.
But that is what they are forced to do in those moments. And so our first strategy is that we openly advocate, although we as a legal above ground group do not engage in, but we advocate and support the use of underground tactics. Be that sabotage, be that armed resistance, be that whatever that may be, but to stop those things.
Yeah, but, I mean, it's said right on the back here, and the guy said it before. You presume this group's the originally started by Derek Jensen didn't take into account to stop the industrial infrastructure without making other plans. Then you have the nuclear power meltdowns going around, happening all over. I mean,
Like I said, these are not answers.
well, how can you
We don't have
ignore that?
answers. Nobody has answers.
Well, you're in effect sanctioning that if you don't address the question.
Can I address that?
Affect change.
Can I address that very
Yeah.
briefly?
Yeah.
You know, we're decommissioning no nuclear power plants. We're commissioning more all the time. We're not decommissioning any.
Yeah. I know.
Every day we add more than 200,000 people to the planet. Every day we add more than 200,000 people to the planet. Do you want to keep going? How long do we keep going? How many people have to suffer? 5 million people a year die early deaths because of climate change.
Yeah.
How many Fukushimas do we want before we say, we're not going to shut them down in time, so let's turn off the heat engine and deal with the consequences? Do you want to wait 20 more years so the population can double again, as it has in my lifetime? Or 20 more so it can double again? Let's stop. We don't know the consequences of nuclear radiation. We know that there was a new species discovered in the sarcophagus of Chernobyl
We don't know
within the
that.
last year or so.
Yes.
So we know life will persist. It almost certainly won't involve human life, but we're done anyway. We're just walking around to save on funeral expenses. Birth is lethal.
Much better answer than I could. Just to finish, and then we'll have a time for questions and discussion. Okay, so the first one is that we need to engage and dismantle these structures, however means that be. You know, if it's peaceful legislation, whatever. But the Keystone XL pipeline should not be allowed to be put in. These are the things that should happen, and we should fight it on whatever terms that we have. That we should aid and participate in ongoing social and ecological struggles. That the struggles that are going on in the Amazon right now from the indigenous, the struggles in the western part of Canada with the Unistoten and the Mi'kmaq tribes, that we should be supporting these struggles to protect the land. That we should defend the land and prevent the expansion, kind of what Guy just kind of mentioned, that we need to stop cutting down the timber. The Constitution pipeline, they're going to have the clear cutting in the next week or two. That needs to be stopped because those trees need to be there. That we need to build and mobilize resistance organizations that support these structures, that support above activities, and include the recruitment, community building, logistical training, and working with social justice groups. You know, I think that this is really great that we're here in a social justice space, and there was a social justice group before us, that the environmental struggle is a social justice struggle, and that we need to combine forces. And then I think the last one is to build. We need to relearn the skills, we need to create the space to build new ways of being. And what those ways of being, I think, we don't have the answers right now. But those are the things that we need to start working on. And so that's just a little bit about deep root resistance and this idea of what it would mean to resist. And these are not new ideas. It's not like, we haven't trademarked these ideas. And these are things that have been taught from previous ancestors, which is why I started off with that poem and previous resistance movements and what will be shown in the future. And so now we're just kind of a little kind of a little discussion, hopefully a short one, and then we're going to start the workshop afterwards. Okay. So I know a lot of people have a lot of things to say. I'm just going to say that in light of the social environment that we're in, those of us, specifically white men, who speak a lot, that maybe we can be very conscious of letting others who don't speak a lot or culturally are not socialized to speak a lot to speak. Okay. So with that, what do people think about where we are, what do people think about this idea of resistance? What do people think about climate change reality? And Guy, maybe if you want to come up and join, we can all join the circle here.
There are three issues that haven't been discussed that if you're going to seriously think about global warming, have to be discussed. The first is that to seriously address the question of global warming, it's going to require the reduction in the standard of living of everybody by at least a third. Now, as we know, some people are going to reduce their standard of living by more than others. And how is one going to deal with the political conflicts of that? The second is that we have a whole range of political and social issues that we have to deal with today. And you have to prioritize that with global warming. We might be having a nuclear war with Russia soon. And war with Islam is going to involve the slaughter of an enormous number of people. And we have to deal with all of that. Then there's all the economic problems of global inequality and all those things. So how do you prioritize that? And the third and the last, and probably the most important, is that many people have suggested that the human species is evolving by merging with our machines. Already, we're able to connect the mind, the brain, to artificial limbs, so that you could move an artificial limb just by thinking about it, the same way we move our arm today. People have suggested that we're going to start to look like the Borg already. You have people walking around with their earbuds all the time, or their telephone attached to their ear. Well, it doesn't go much farther than attaching a computer to your brain, so that instead of having to access the internet, you could just do it mentally. And eventually, artificial intelligence is just 20 minutes away, where we're going to be producing robots that are similar to Data on Star Trek, and these robots very soon are going to become self-conscious, and then they're going to discover that the human species isn't necessary. They're very inefficient. They produce waste. They consume resources. The machines are much more efficient, and we're likely to be displaced.
I don't know.
Following up on the Borg analogy, I think that's what we're fighting against at this point. I feel like globalized capitalism and industrialization is the Borg. And at this point, resistance is futile. It's not there's not enough people disconnected from this system that we're all sort of hopelessly dependent on for our survival to mount a serious and sort of effective resistance at this point. I don't know when that will happen, or if it will happen before we run out of air or water or land, but I don't know. It just doesn't look like it's looking good right now. Yeah. You know, I think that the most important thing is just be kind to people and just be nice and love as many people as you can, and leave it at that.
I think to tap.
I'm sorry, and please speak to the group, not just us.
To tap into Naomi Klein and the shock doctrine, I think that we are created a safe environment for ourselves, which isn't safe, and we need to use a little Milton Friedman tactics and shock ourselves. And your idea, I think, to do that, or their group's idea, is a good idea. And I think what will come out of it is sort of like out of the ashes, will come something. Well, I think that's kind of bullshit with Milton Friedman, but I think it's almost our only hope at this point. We need to shock ourselves, our friends, our families, our politicians, everybody. We need to scare the shit out of them so they think differently.
I liked everything you said. One of the things that I keep looking at is the resistance communities I've known, and we're what, a month and a half away from a massive opportunity for non-cooperation if all of us put our 1040s in the mail signed Dick Hertz with no check in it.
Yeah.
What is it? I was working with the folks who did Occupy Wall Street, and everybody here has a social network. Everybody in this room has an ability to go and say, you are the reason this system keeps going. That I remember when Al Haig was looking at the 10 million people who marched against nuclear weapons, and he said they can march anywhere they want as long as they keep paying their taxes. We need to start, everybody needs to be deputized on that. And if you can't do that, then just tell the IRS the dog ate your homework and you'll turn your stuff in August, and watch how quickly the Treasury panics when 40 million of us do that. Just a thought.
Can we get, a woman or female voice that's not spoken, or would like to? They've been oppressed so long.
I think we should stop having sex until we solve this problem.
Or with each other.
Unless it's gay sex. Unless it's gay sex.
I had not read that.
I'd just like to bring up something that continues to bother me, and that is that we've got a present world population of, 7.2 billion people. Most of those people are dependent on technology and technological agriculture for their survival.
Yeah.
And the reality of the situation is that that's not sustainable. Not sustainable is a polite way of saying you're going to die. And we're not going to have any hope at all of any kind of stabilization without the death, not because I want it to be so, but because it will be so, of billions of people. And I think we need to address that and cop to that reality. Otherwise we're not going to make any even quasi-realistic plans.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. It's really hard to confront death and what it means in this culture. There are some efforts. There's this organization that just launched last year that I just heard about, uncrowded.org, that does a lot of, really points out the intersection between reproductive justice and population and climate change, and we can't have infinite growth on a finite planet. Because as we have setbacks to people's ability to make choices about whether they reproduce or not, it makes things inherently less sustainable. There's a lot more to say about that. There's a statistician, Hans Rosling, who predicts we'll cap out at around 10 or 11 billion because we're at peak child, about 2 billion. As education goes up in developed countries, we've seen rate of births per woman approach about 2, so replacement rate. So it's not, obviously there's a lot more that can go wrong, and it can go higher than that. But I think there's, we can kind of think about this in terms of, if we can survive, we need to maximize the carrying capacity of the Earth for human life and for non-human life, and that's also a balance. I mean, of course, maybe the bigger question is whether we can survive at all. But I wanted to address a couple other things. 32 nuclear reactors have been decommissioned, and there are a lot of grassroots efforts to shut down more, that especially like old second-generation ones. Like there's, I think, the Indian Point Coalition and the New York Safe Energy Coalition are pushing really hard on that. About the singularity, Ray Kurzweil has predicted we'll get there around 2045. I don't think he's really factoring in the problem with resources and climate change. I don't think he's terribly far off, but we might not last that long. So strong AI could help us with logistical parts of climate change. The other thing I wanted to clarify was I think the only measurements we have, as far as I know, of current observed methane releases in the Arctic are 8 million tons, so 8 megatons per year from Shakova and her team in 2010. And then I think they updated that in 2013, saying with storms it could be another 10 megatons or so. And I remember that they Shakova kind of walked back from the 50 gigaton burst theory, thinking it would be more of like a trend upwards. Am I missing out on any other measurements or studies? Because all I've heard is that she really wants more studies and observation on that, and we don't have them. Is that right?
Imagine a research scientist asking for more research.
Yeah.
I've never seen that come.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, we can't tell the difference between
the data, we have atmospheric methane data
parts per billion,
indicating that in 2014 there was 2.5 to 5 times as much methane in the atmosphere globally as there was in 2013. In 2013, it was about twice as much as it was in 2012. That's exponential release.
Very, very possibly.
Also, you have a bunch of methane craters just blowing up in Siberia.
Right.
Just this week, they announced 30 to 40 after the first one last summer they found. So I mean, that is totally
30 or 40.
geological. Yeah.
And that's not,
I mean, that is
small
just
levels
total
are-
cataclysmic upheaval. I mean, you're talking about primal upheaval of the planet. I mean, it's
And we're still digging holes in it to
they're
form it.
looking to use the highways up there for fuel Russia. They're not even abandoning the search for the to use it as fuel. So I mean, it's you know.
We talk about the land, right, and the food and all that stuff, but land's what, 50%, 20% of the planet, and how much of that is arable? So the real issue to me is the oceans. We have the oceans and land.
They're dying.
So we have to learn how to eat jellyfish, guys. I mean, that's what it's gonna boil down to. So let's adjust our food systems.
I just wanted
So
to,
just a couple more.
yeah, I just wanted to say, like in light of what Guy said, and I mean, we may not, be allowed much longer, but to me, if there was any chance of that, we should really look back into what has, been sustainable, like look through human history, and what seems from, reading a lot of different things, it seems like horticulture has always been sustainable, which is what permaculture is based on. So lately I've been looking to like organic permaculture and like new sustainable ways to rebuild.
I'm a huge fan of permaculture. We implement the principles of permaculture on the homestead where I live off-grid in southwestern New Mexico. I'm a huge fan of action. I've never proposed inaction. We ought to be doing a lot of things that we're not doing, including dismantling industrial civilization. But, so I have lots of reasons to want humans to persist a long time. But the evidence has overwhelmed me, and I just don't see much hope for that happening anymore. So yes, we should take right action and be detached from the outcome of that action, consistent with Buddhist philosophy. We should be doing the right things, including permaculture and planting trees and trying to dismantle the omnicidal system that's killing us all. We should be doing all that. But the evidence suggests that it won't matter at this point. I'm not saying we shouldn't do it anyway, of course we should. But it's not about us. We're looking forward to a very peaceful planet.
But what's the motivation?
Money.
To do what? To save habitat for
to do all of
non-humans?
that without looking for the solution. So to speak.
To preserve habitat for non-human species on the planet as long as possible. To preserve habitat for non-civilized or indigenous peoples for as long as possible. I think those are two perfectly good reasons.
It's enough that we've already destroyed.
Yeah.
We've lost already millions of species since our conception, since the 20th century.
I mean, the indigenous people are the only one that are living sustainably at this point. So they should get to stay.
You're going to be asking yourself, why are we going to save the human race though? We're going to destroy ourselves when we're gonna. And we're on a roll right now.
We traded rainforests for cheap beef. Why do we deserve to be saved? Why don't we ask that question?
And as a
We're
young
mad at ourselves. We didn't know any better for a long time.
yeah, that's true. But as a youngster now, you know that the weight is on us, kind of.
We have known better. For 40 years at least, we've known.
Oh yes, that's a long time.
And those 40 years, people have been saying, let's do this, let's fix this. And all of those environmental groups failed us, and we gave them thousands of dollars and thousands of our hours. We gave them our criminal records, we've given them so much, and what have they done? We are like cats and they're trying to herd us. I mean, we're an amazing species, we're wonderful and we're awful. And we're you know, you wanna try to get everyone to be a vegan? Well,
You okay there?
it's not gonna happen.
He fell out of his chair over the try asking him to shut the lights off. And the internet.
What you said earlier, be nice to each other. We're going down with the ship. We can be nice to each other in these last hours. We can choose to do that. There's no way out of it. We're not getting off the Titanic. So
we want to control trash.
those nuclear power plants, I was the one who asked the question of Greg Jasko and Arnie
Gunderson.
Yeah.
And they said, they went, 50, 60, 50 years to decommission if they have enough money to do that. You can close a plant.
Yeah, that's
You can close a plant next week. They have to decommission, and that takes our money, not theirs.
it's a huge process.
Yeah.
So I think just in the light of time, because we started late and we do want to get to this workshop, I think that's a great point to close on. And I think that, having the youth speak was really prevalent. And this idea of kind of connecting it to what is the motivation. And it's not, I work in medicine, like I tell people horrible diagnoses all day, and it's not like the message is the message. It's what we do with that.
It's just not right to sanction the covert nuclear war that's taking place against not only humans but whales and many other species. And in fact, by not even making some kind of a statement, which I agree with about decommissioning industrial civilization, but making no effort to titrate it, saying nothing about Fukushima and the necessity to post, like she said, maybe decommissioning takes 100 years, but maybe putting cement on it could be done quicker. But by not addressing those questions, you're in fact sanctioning what one person called, scientist Moret, called a covert nuclear war against the population. And you're saying that's fine, as far as I'm concerned.
I mean, I would disagree. We can talk about this afterwards. I just, in the interest of time, for everyone's time, we can talk about these things. We're gonna have a little break right now, but I just want to close this point here, and then we can talk. Something that I think when we kind of plan these talks is this idea of love, and I know this is something that Guy is going to talk a lot about later. And one quote that always comes to mind, it's a Che quote, and not that I agree or with the tactics of Che, but I think the words are beautiful. That the true revolutionary is guided by great feelings of love. And what that love is, I think, is the question. And then what those actions are because of that love, well, the love will tell us what the actions are. And I think that's where we are right now, is we are weak. The situation is pretty bad. But we're still here, and to be human is to do something. And I think that, yes, we have screwed it up for so many people that it's our duty, our obligation, to not go off to the farm and, play music and play in the dirt, because we have an obligation. And so I just want to close this part. Now we'll have a little break, a couple minutes, and then Guy will start the next part. Is that right? Okay. So you just mingle, go to the bathroom. The bathrooms are in the back.
Let me explain the next part. This is a workshop. It's titled "Abrupt Climate Change: How Will You Show Up in Humanity's Final Chapter?" And the original version was called the Climate Reality Acceptance Process. But people push back against the acronym for the Climate Reality Acceptance Project. So we changed the title just a little bit. Anyway, what we're dealing with is reality in a grief-denying, death-denying culture. And so one way of viewing grief is it's an incomplete relationship, or it's wishing for a different past. Yeah, we made some mistakes. As a species, as a culture, we made some horrible mistakes. But we can't wish for a different past. We need to patch up those relationships we have with the living planet and with the people we're killing every day, and the people and the cultures that we have killed to this point. So that's the purpose of this workshop that will start this evening and go pretty much all day tomorrow. So if you can commit to the next hour or so, and also to about 6 hours tomorrow, please stay. In fact, please stay even if you can't commit to tomorrow for as long as you're willing. So we'll take about a 5-minute break here and get ourselves organized.
There's pamphlets for Deep Resistance. There's also Guy's books. There's an email list. Please sign up. Bathrooms are in the back.